Welcome back to Iron Anchor Cycles. In an effort to keep up with our YouTube videos, we have a pretty cool project we're doing today on this Dyna, and I figured this would be a great opportunity for us to jump in and show you what we're going to do. So this bike has been here at the shop before. We've done a couple of things on it. We put these bars and risers on, a set of one-finger levers, a couple other small details, but really, as you can see hopefully from the bike here next to me, it's pretty stock other than those couple of modifications we made. It's actually, at least for me, a little interesting. We don't often see Dynas come into the shop that are mostly stock anymore. I mean, particularly closed air cleaner still, original pipes and Harley mufflers on there. Pretty unique at this point, but we're going to change all that. One of the things we're going to do on this is we are going to get what Harley would call a stage one, I guess, on there. And we're going to put a pipe and a proper air cleaner. And the air cleaner is going to be just an off-the-shelf part. I think we're going to go with Arlen Ness's Big Sucker on this one. And the pipe, of course, because it's us, wouldn't be anything else other than an HPI 2-in-1 stainless. So we're going to get those things put on pretty quickly. In addition to that, we've got a seat we did custom for this customer from Saddlemen, so we'll get that put on. And then probably the most involved and probably biggest upgrade we're going to do is we're going to tackle the suspension, both front and rear, with components from Ohlins. So we're going to get all that stuff put on, and we're going to get this bike looking pretty good, and more importantly, riding really killer. So stick around, and we'll show you how some of this goes and what this bike looks like before it rolls out of here. Okay, so we've got most of the disassembly that we're going to do for the moment done. Didn't feel the need to show you all that. Hopefully taking off a stock exhaust, air cleaner, and taking the rear shocks off isn't too much of a big deal for any of you guys. What we're going to do now is just start to install some of the new stuff and get this thing where it's got to be. The first thing we're going to do is just put the new air cleaner on. Super quick, super easy. We'll do that, we'll do the pipe, and then we'll move to the back and we'll start working on some of that stuff. I mentioned the Arlen Ness Big Sucker, I think they call it. This is basically a pretty decent economy, sort of budget-friendly air cleaner for a twin cam. I've talked a lot about air cleaners before. If you're in the market for one, they're not all created equal, but there's a lot of similarities between them. Basically, you've got some super budget ones. Let's call those like the Amazon Special. I'm not even going to get into that. They're junk. You've got a big meaty chunk in the middle of air cleaners that are all very similar. They all use an almost identical air filter to this one. They're made by just about everybody out there, from Screaming Eagle to Ness to S&S to Vance and Hines. I'm sure probably plenty more, and they're all incredibly similar. The difference is going to be in the small details of how they mount, what they look like, different hardware, things like that. And this is one that is, like I said, very budget friendly. These are inexpensive. They get a little bit more expensive when you start to add the covers that you can get as an option with them. But you can also run, on a lot of bikes, the stock cover will fit right over this, which keeps it, like I said, pretty budget friendly. So we're just gonna go ahead and put this on, and I'll just give you a couple of little pointers as we do it. The first thing is we're going to use blue Loctite on just about everything we use on here. The only exception to that is going to be, this is the mount. I'm trying to get that to focus there. There we go. That is going to be used to put your backing plate onto your throttle body. And this comes as two pieces out of the box. So you have this little stud right here, and then you have the standoff that the screws for the air filter itself are going to attach to. This comes as two pieces. There's not really a good reason for it other than sure, it's a manufacturing thing, that to make this as one piece would probably be far more expensive than to just make this piece and then include an inexpensive set screw essentially that goes into it. So it's got a little Allen hole in the back of it. Make sure you put this in the correct way so that the place to tighten it is not on the inside. We red Loctite this into this. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, you really don't want small pieces coming undone, falling into your air cleaner and going down your throttle body. The other reason is that this never needs to come apart. Once this is together, this becomes one piece, and it's essentially a male on this side and a female on this side. And when the air cleaner is on and this is on here, when you turn this to take this out, you want it to come apart where this stud stays in here rather than staying in the throttle body. So we're going to use blue Loctite on this end of it and red Loctite on the end that's already in, and that way hopefully, when you turn this to break it loose, the stud will come out with the standoff as opposed to staying on the bike. And if it stays on the bike, you'll have a hard time getting it off because there's nothing to turn it with. Obviously, you could put a couple nuts on there and get it off that way, so it's not the end of the world, but just a little detail there that I like to point out. So, like I said, we're gonna go ahead and get started putting this on. We've got 4 O-rings. This is a little bit of some of the details I mentioned. Some of these out there don't come with O-rings or a crush washer or something, and you're just doing metal to metal. Obviously, that's not one you want to use. You want to use something that hopefully uses an O-ring to seal off your breathers so that you don't get any leakage. So what we're going to do to hold these O-rings in place while we do the install is I'm just going to put a little bit of assembly lube onto them. You can kind of use anything you want here. You can use grease. Engine oil might work, might not. The idea is you're trying to lubricate them so they don't crack or tear when they go on, but also, and maybe more importantly, you're trying to get them so that they will kind of be held in place in their little grooves so that when you put this on, they don't fall off. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to take a little bit of blue Loctite for the breather bolts. And we'll go ahead and get this started. Make sure I didn't lose anything. Okay. All right. So just started that. Now we've got to get our 3 studded standoffs in. So I mentioned I'm going to put a drop of blue Loctite on the exposed ends of these. And now before we put that in, obviously there's a gasket that needs to go in here. So we're just going to slide this back here, making sure that it's lined up. And get these started. All right, then with them all started, we'll simply snug everything down, make sure everything is aligned, and then we'll do a final tighten on each of these. Okay, so we've got these all in, we've got them all tight and ready just to move on. Like I said, this is real simple. The next thing to go on is going to be the air filter itself. I'm going to put a drop of blue Loctite on each of those screws and get the filter in place. And go ahead and put those screws in. All right, so that's good. And our last step is going to be to put our cover on. Got a little bit of blue Loctite on there already. And we're set and good to go. So that's the air cleaner. Like I said, really simple, really easy to put on. Really no big deal to any part of that. So I'm going to go ahead and get repositioned. And before we do the pipe, we're actually going to move to the back and we're going to start on the rear shocks. But before we do that, we've actually got the bike, the shocks disconnected and the fender jacked way up high so that we can get the alloy art turn signals installed that we're putting in. So those are going to be mounted here on the struts, and we just want to be able to run the wiring under the fender and back up under the seat. So I'll position for that and I'll show you how those go on. We're going to tackle the wiring a little bit later, but at least we can show you those things and see what they look like. Okay, so we're over here at the back of the bike, and we're just going to go ahead and get the Alloy Art strut lights put on, and that is right here in my hand. These come, I think we've mentioned before, in a lot of different finishes and fitments for different bikes, be it Dynas or Sportsters, FXRs, M8 Softails, Twin Cam Softails, I think as well. They're super cool. They work really well. We've been using them on a lot of bikes. Just a quick note about putting these on. We're not obviously doing a huge focus on this. We've got some other bigger stuff to tackle here, but I figured as long as we're putting them on this bike, we'd mention some details on it. The first thing is, these are, while they're really, really great, word of caution to point out is they are not bolt-on in most cases, and they are certainly not plug-and-play in any case. And I'll explain what I mean by both those things. Start with plug-and-play. This is what you're going to get, which is the light itself, and you're going to get bare wires that you're going to need to figure out how to hook up into your bike. This isn't complicated. It comes with a wiring diagram to tell you what each of these wires do, and you can, use your own method for how you want to get this connected to your rear harness. I think, if you're looking for something that's truly plug and play, you can look to somebody like Custom Dynamics or something like that, who everything they make is really designed to just plug right in with modular harnesses and adapters and things like that. You're gonna have to get a little bit more creative with these, but hopefully not a big deal for you. So all that said, we're gonna go ahead and bolt this on. The other thing I mentioned, right, so not plug and play, not bolt on. So part of the reason I mention that is because in just about every case I've done, you do need to figure out a way to get this wire back to the middle of the bike. And in some bikes like the Lowrider S, or the Lowriders, I guess, the M8s, the fenders, the struts have channels in them for wires to run. In the case of most bikes, the wires are meant to run inside the fender, and they'll pop out through a little hole under here. So you've got a hole that's here, that's meant for the original turn signal wiring. But that turn signal wiring, and it's a little bit hard to visualize, but if you think about the factory turn signals, the bolt is here and the wiring is here. On these, it's reversed. So basically, the hole that you have to get this wiring through sits behind this bolt. So your bolt hole is here and your wiring hole is here. Now, you could ask, why not reverse that and bolt it on this way? You could. It's up to you. Both holes go through, obviously. It's just a question of figuring out the most clean way to run the wiring. And in our case, what I've decided is the easiest way to do this is, because there's quite a bit of play in the front part of this, because the strut is tapered, you can get the wire underneath the strut, in between this, the strut and the light itself. And we did was we just ground a little notch into the fender strut itself for the wiring to sit in, and we painted that obviously to avoid any rust. And then the wires can run right into the factory location and just clip into the little channels that are under the fender and run it all the way back. Alloy Art provides some other options. You can drill a hole into the fender itself in front of the strut, but in the area that'll be covered so you won't see it. I suppose you could do that. I like the idea of grinding a little channel into this steel piece rather than drilling into your painted fender, but that would be up to you. In any event, long story short, sorry, this has got a little long-winded, you're gonna have to figure out a way to get it all to work. They look great once they're on, but you just gotta figure it out. So I'm gonna go ahead and insert these wires. Oh, the other thing too is these wires are gonna come bare, and you're gonna have to come up with some sort of wire loom, or in our case, we use like a fiber tape, like a gaffer's tape, to just protect them. So I'm gonna come in here. Right. And then obviously what I got to do here is just make sure that the wire sits in the channel we created for it and it doesn't get pinched. So that would be the most critical element here. Okay. And you should be able to feel if you've got it in. Is this sitting flat? Is it metal on metal? And there's still play in the wires. That's going to give you the positive confirmation that you didn't pinch the wires and you got them into that channel, and also that you you ground that channel deep enough. So we're going to put the bolt through. The bolt also does not come with these, so you will need to supply your own hardware. Okay, so that connected, I'm going to just get this wire up inside the channel. And obviously you can see here with the rear shocks disconnected, we were able to jack the bike way up, so there's plenty of room to work under here. This will be a whole lot harder if you tried doing this with the shocks on the bike and trying to get your hand up under there. I'm sure you could do it, but since we were installing shocks anyway, and it's only a couple of bolts, this makes it way easier to do it in this order. If you're doing this without doing the shocks, my suggestion would be just unbolt the lower bolts and jack the bike up. With these on, we don't need any more access under the fender, so we're able to lower the bike back down, and we'll continue the installation here with doing the rear shocks, and then we'll start moving forward and get everything else tackled. All right, so as I said, the next step here is we're gonna go ahead and move on to doing our rear shocks. So what we're doing on this bike is a set of HC 765s from Ohlins, and these are a pretty big favorite of ours. Ohlins, if you're familiar, has a couple different tiers of shocks. They have at their bottom end an emulsion shock, at their top end their remote reservoir shocks. Remote reservoir being a piggyback for the Dynas or being truly remote for the baggers. This shock, however, sits right in between the two and is adjustable in both length and with the compression rebound adjuster here. Technically speaking, this is rebound, but it really does do both. Obviously has preload adjustment as well. And this is, in terms of bang for the buck, I would argue the best value that Ohlins has. And it's probably, in each category per bike, their best seller, I would guess. So this equivalent shock for a bagger, a Dyna, etc. So the install is pretty simple. You obviously have to get your settings done on the shock. We won't get too deep into that here, but suffice it to say, you want to get your preload in a reasonably close estimated place to start off with, which we've done. We'll confirm it with the rider on the bike. We'll check the sag by measuring. There's a factory spec for the rebound adjuster here, and obviously you can adjust the height here at the bottom, which we have brought out to the max on this one. So this shock starts at 13 inches and is adjustable out to just under 13.5 inches, and that's where we've put it. So real simple. Basically what we've got to do is just get the shock situated here on the bike. These, because they are not an emulsion shock, but a fully chambered shock, these can be mounted either way. We're going to mount them in the traditional upright position for this one. But basically, you've got some spacers that need to go on. And this is, like I said, very straightforward. So we've got an inner, and we've got a collar, and then we'll slide the shock on. And unlike the baggers, there's an outer as well. We'll go ahead and add Loctite. I'm not going to do this quite yet. I'm just going to throw this on here just for the moment, just so I can sort of illustrate what I'm doing. On the bottom, that order is going to be the same with an outer spacer, the collar, and then an inner spacer. But obviously, we have the bike too high. I don't know if you can really see this on the camera, but I'll reposition and we'll lower the bike. So there we have it repositioned. So this is probably a little in the way here too, but hopefully you can see now. We've got the bike just sitting up a little bit too high in order to get this on. So I'll come over to the other side and lower the bike down. I can kind of do this two-handed. We want to get this in position so that the bolt is going to line up with the bottom hole. Obviously, if you hadn't done the lights and you were just taking your factory shocks off, in this situation, you wouldn't be lowering, you'd be raising to accommodate for the extra height. Or not doing much at all if you got shocks that were roughly the same length. So that is roughly where that is going to sit. Now, what you would do here is in theory, just put your Loctite on, torque these down and go. But what I like to do is just get both sides at least into position so that you can make sure that it's all gonna go on. In a lot of cases on the Harleys, it won't quite raise and lower evenly. So if the holes aren't gonna line up with the jack in the same position, you obviously wanna make sure that you do the side that's a little bit longer so that you can compress it with the weight of the bike, because obviously once the shorter side is on, you won't be able to stretch it out without, you know, a lot of force. So sorry if that didn't make sense, but basically it's just due to the imbalance of the table, the lift, whatever, that it doesn't necessarily lift up completely straight. It's not because the shocks are different lengths. It's just the gap is a little bit different when you have it on a jack. So I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna go just do the other side real quick. We'll come back here once I've got the height on that side confirmed, and we'll finish this up. Okay, we've got the height correct on the other side, so they're both even in this case, which is great. They both slide on and off with the jack in the same position. One more thing I wanna do here, which I neglected to do earlier, is just come in here with a wire brush and just get the old Loctite off this stud. We did the same thing on the lower bolts. Just took them over to the wire wheel and cleaned those off. You know, you wanna get all that old junk out of there. So with that taken care of, we can go ahead and put our spacer back on. Collar is inside the eyelet of the shock. Put our outer spacer on and do the same on the bottom. We've got our spacer, collar, spacer. And I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of blue Loctite on the bottom here, as well as on the top. Get that started. Top started. All right, so that is the installation. Really, really simple, like I said. Obviously, getting the setup correct is the most critical thing here, obviously in addition to getting sure they're mounted right, but that's what we'll need to do once we've got our customer here. We'll get him on the bike and we'll take all the measurements. But for this moment, I'm gonna go over and just complete the other side, and then we'll continue on with getting that HPI pipe installed. Okay, so we're about ready to get started with the pipe install. Just one more point I forgot to mention on the rear shock installation. One more thing that you're gonna wanna check is to make sure that your belt tension is correct. Obviously, if you are lengthening your rear shocks, you're gonna take tension off the belt. Basically, when you move it down like that, you're gonna create tension. You're gonna remove tension by moving the sprocket closer to the transmission sprocket. So it's a good opportunity to check the alignment, and then once you've got it aligned, get your tension correct by evenly turning the adjusters together. In this one, it took about 3/4 of a turn on each side to get it to correct tension. So that's all set. We're gonna move on to doing this pipe now. Trying to think of a good place to stand while I do this. So we've done some HPI pipe installs on video before. We do a bunch of them. Needless to say, it's our favorite pipe. No question. I think I'm wearing the shirt today too. So first thing we're gonna do here is get some of the bike stuff squared away, and then we'll go ahead and get the head pipes set up and we'll put them on. So the first thing we're gonna do is just put this bracket on. This is gonna be the support bracket for the rear section of the pipe. Worth pointing and just showing you this to start off with. This bracket all by itself, which is a TIG welded stainless steel piece, is probably nicer and has more fab gone into it than some of the other pipes that are on the market. Most of the pipes you're gonna see are gonna come with basically just a bent piece of mild steel that's powder coated. They break, they don't go on super well. This is a really, really awesome piece. Just wanna throw that out there. This is unique to the Dynas. Each bike has its own mount. Obviously the Dyna one is particularly cool. So anyway, we're just gonna remove the rear two bolts on the transmission bearing housing. And we are gonna replace those with the hardware that came with the HPI bracket. Right. So we've got stainless Allen head screws for this one. Find the wrench for it, that would help. All right, gonna try not to block here, just get into the right, that down with the ratchet, and then just come back and give that a final torque. Cool. All right, so with that in place, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and swap out the gaskets for the headers. Depending on the bike or the pipe you had on here before, you may already have a flat style gasket in there. If you don't, these are included, and obviously if it's in good shape you can leave it, but you got 2 new ones in the box with the pipe, so you might as well use them. In our case, there's a factory pipe that came off here, so it's got tapered style gaskets, so we're going to take those out. Just come in here. All right, with that all cleaned up, we're going to go ahead and put the new gaskets in now. If you've ever done this before, you'll know the tapered gaskets are a really snug fit, and you kind of got to push them in with your thumbs, and they can kind of get warped and messed up. These are a little different. They're actually a pretty loose fit, and they'll just fall out if you just kind of throw them in there. So what we do is, if you just ever so slightly tug on it and just oval it out a little bit, it'll hold inside of the port, and it'll stay where you need it. It makes them really easy to put in that way. All right, so we've got those in, ready to go. That is going to be the last step in terms of the prep here, and we just got to grab our head pipes and get those set up, and we'll get them put in. Okay, so we've got our head pipes ready to go on. This is the front, obviously. We've got our new clip installed in front of the factory flange, and that's installed over, obviously, the end of the pipe here. And then we've got our factory O2 sensor into the reducer that comes with the pipe into the large bung that's on the pipe. So obviously you have the ability to put wideband O2s in here, which is incredibly important for dyno tuning, and also if you're running like a Thunder Max or something like that, or like an auto tune module on your bike. But in this case, factory O2s are going back in. So we're going to put these pipes on the bike, or the head pipes on the bike, one at a time, being careful not to scratch anything. Obviously, you've got gloves on. We're going to wipe these pipes down very, very well when we're done anyway, but just in an effort to minimize any kind of oils or scratching or anything like that. We're just going to be real careful with the install. So I'm going to go ahead and start to get these put in place loosely, and then we'll pick up from there. All right, so at this point we should be buttoning up our exhaust, but as you can see, I've got it back off the bike. Now, we hit a little snag, which is not uncommon when working with bikes with different kinds of parts and different things. And the snag we hit in this particular case was this bike had forward controls on it, which we knew, and forward controls can present an incompatibility with certain pipes. However, the HPI pipe does fit with factory forward controls, so the hope was that it would fit with the TC Brothers controls that were on this bike. Unfortunately, just because of the size and positioning and all that and the differences in the parts, there is a clearance issue. And I'm looking around behind me trying to find what I did with that forward control. I don't know where it is. I was going to show you where it was hitting and what the issue was, but in any event, for the moment we just got the pipe back off. We are going to figure out how to make that work, or just put the factory controls back on. One way or the other we'll make it happen, but in the interest of time and just trying to get as much done on this bike as we can today, just took the pipe off and got everything kind of neatened up, and we're just going to move on and just go ahead and do the front forks at this point. So as I mentioned, we've got a set of Ohlins cartridges to go in here. Complements the rear really well, of course, and gives you the best ride you can get out of standard front end Dyna. So I'm going to go ahead and do this disassembly, and probably won't show that on camera because it's pretty simple to pull the fork legs out of Dyna. But I will check back in and kind of show you the process as we go through, and I'll show you how this goes. All right, so we're over here in the back of the shop where we've got a little area set up to do the install on the cartridges for forks. This is a pretty easy one. I didn't show the assembly, like I said, or sorry, the disassembly. Real simple to get the fork legs off of a Dyna. Just wheel off, fender off, two bolts, they slide right out. This particular one, there's no sign of any issues with the seals, the bushings or anything like that, so we're going to leave it intact, and we're just going to take out our old guts, clean out the inside with some suspension parts cleaner, and get the cartridges installed. So shouldn't take too long, not too complicated. We've got 2 cartridges along with 2 springs, and then some additional preload spacers, collars, and some other pieces that go along. Obviously the cartridges, just like any other set from Ohlins, have all the usual features: external preload adjustment, as well as external compression and rebound adjustment, compression on the left fork and rebound on the right. So this one is rebound, so this is going to be on the right side, and the other one over here will be on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I will show, maybe not just the dumping out of the old stuff out of these. I know I've done another video on doing Dyna forks, so check that out if you want to see the how-to. But I'll just show you kind of how this goes together, and then we'll get it back on the bike. All right, so we've got both of our fork legs disassembled and cleaned and dry. And we're going to go ahead and start the assembly process on these with the new parts. So this is our right side on this particular bike. You can identify that by the fact that there's no brake mount on it, and also that it's got the clamp for the axle on this side. So just taking a look, making sure everything is still aligned. There's your oil cup in the bottom here that if you've ever disassembled these, you'd know what it looks like. Probably have one sitting here. Looks like this. So this guy, once this is disassembled and the bolt is taken out of the bottom, if you move it all around like you do when you're cleaning, this can kind of come up and get crooked, sideways, unaligned. So you just want to make sure before you try to put everything back together that it's in the right spot. And so the easiest way to do that is just to look down and through, and if you can see the floor on the other side, you're good. So we're going to go ahead and get this put together. So our first step is going to be to make sure that there's a top-out spring sitting in the bottom of the fork. These are from the original components, and they need to go back in. So with that in, we can go ahead and grab our rebound leg, and that is going to be this side. So what we'll do here is remove the cap, put that aside for the moment, and we'll put the pull-up tool on here. Okay, so with the pull-up tool on, we'll take the whole thing and lower it down inside, and just make sure it's all seated in there nicely. And now we're ready to install the bolt in the bottom. So we've got the original bolt that came out, we've got a new copper crush washer on there along with a little bit of blue Loctite, and we're going to go ahead and get that started by hand. Okay. Now with that started, we will tighten it up using the impact. All right. So in this case, it's nice to have one of these with a variable torque on it so that you at least have some idea of the amount of torque you're putting onto that bolt. There is a spec for it, but in my experience, what we get out of the second of 3 settings on this gun works really well. It's probably about where it should be, but in any event, not too tight, not too loose, it works. So from there, what we're going to do is get the oil level done in here. So I'm going to grab some Ohlins suspension fluid. This is very specific stuff. You can't use conventional, traditional sort of fork oil with these. You got to use Ohlins fluid. So we're going to pour this in. We're not measuring right now. We're going to fill this up basically all the way to the top once it starts bubbling and bleeding in. Once we bleed the air out of the cartridge, that is when we'll set the level using the measurement method versus the volume method. So basically what I'm doing is it's just sort of bubbling and the oil level is dropping, and I'm just continuing to pour more in as the oil level comes down. And looks like it stopped bubbling there. So now what we have to do is bleed this out. So we're going to move the inner tube up and down, which will first draw some oil in and force some air out. And then we'll do the same thing on the cartridge itself, which will continue the process. So I like to start there, just check the oil level, come back, do this. All right. And an interesting note on these, because one side is compression and one side is rebound, you can tell that by the resistance you feel on this rod. In this case, there's no resistance going down, but there is resistance coming up. So obviously the side of this that is valved is the rebound side. All right, so we're going to continue to do this until we get no more air bubbling. Okay, so with this all bled out, we're just going to double check the oil level here and just make sure that it is higher than where we want it to be. And ultimately that's because the way we're going to check our level is using this little, I don't even know what you'd call this, a syringe with a measuring gauge on it. So basically what it's going to do is stick down into the tube and it's going to pull out any oil that is above the level that we want it. So obviously if the oil starts out below that level, this isn't going to do us any good. So just by sight, it's definitely above that level. So we are ready to get the fork oil set. So I've already gone ahead and set this to the correct level, which for this particular setup is 150 millimeters. So I'm just going to go ahead and start to draw oil out of the shock and into here. All right, so you may get to the point where you keep pulling, you fill the syringe, you haven't gotten there yet, no big deal. All you got to do is empty the syringe and keep going. This is a little easier with a second set of hands, but by myself today, so we're going to do it on our own. Okay, get that back in place. And keep going. And you can hear it start to bubble. We've reached the end. Oil level is correct. I'm going to put this aside, empty this out. Okay. All right, now that the oil level's been set, we can go ahead and start to put the rest of the components inside here. So we're going to start with our spring. We're going to put this part number facing up. And then we're going to put a collar on. And this is directional. It's got a side that fits the spring, and it's got a side that fits the preload collar. It's only gonna work properly in one way, so just make sure you get that in right. And now we're going to take our pull-up tool off. So what I like to do is, although it makes it perhaps a little bit more difficult to get it on, I like to put a little bit, move the nut down and get a little bit of tension on this so that it holds in place better. So like that. So now the hold up tool is using that nut to hold it in place, which is holding the rod up. And now once again, I'm just going to put this aside. And our next step is going to be to put the cap on. So I'm just going to put a little bit of lubricant on the O-ring. This is just a grease that comes from Ohlins, but you can certainly use whatever you want here. Really anything you'd use on an O-ring would probably be fine here. Okay, and as that O-ring kind of goes up, it's going to drag a little bit of assembly lube or grease in this case across the threads of the cap. That's a good thing. So I'm just going to sort of wipe off the excess that's on my fingers here onto the cap threads. And go ahead and get this back over here and install the cap onto the rod. So we're going to thread that down until it bottoms out. You'll feel that it's going to start turning the rod itself. So then what we're going to do is we will take turn this until it's basically brought the nut all the way up, and we're going to use two wrenches here, a 14 mil on the nut. Sorry, the other way around. A 13 mil on the nut, and a 14 mil on the fork cap, and we'll tighten the nut onto the fork cap. Oop, I'm going the wrong way. We'll tighten the nut onto the fork cap. Nice and snug, nothing crazy. And at this point we can take this tool out. Alright, so now the only other thing worth pointing out is this is basically it, and we're going to pull the inner tube up and we're going to start to thread it on. Depending on your situation, the bike that you have, this could be loose or tight right here. You see now, if it was sort of like this and you have all this flopping around here, you're going to want to turn the preload adjuster to put some tension on this so that it can't come apart as you start to put it together. Because if this gets cocked like that, obviously you're going to have a problem. So in our case, we can just hold the tension like that because there's not that much free play. And we can start to just put this together this way. All right, so we get that started, and then all we've got to do is tighten this up. And I'll do that after I take my gloves off and we wipe everything down. For the moment, this is just going to stay hand tight, and then we're going to go ahead and do the other side. So I'm going to do the other side off camera, and then we'll check back in to look at some of the adjustments, and then we'll get the bike put back together. Okay, so with everything all cleaned up, we've just got the fully assembled fork leg just held in the vise here. So I'm just going to tighten up the top cap. Typically you'd want to use a specialty wrench like this that's for the right size. However, I don't know where our special wrench is for that. So we're going to use this absurdly large, just standard 41 millimeter wrench, which will do the job, but you just have to be careful, number one, not to over tighten it, and number two, not to scratch anything. So that's fine right there. And then I'm going to do the preload next. So making sure that it's at 0, which is right there, all the way out. I'm going to go ahead and put the proper amount of preload on this based on our rider's weight. Okay, so it's going to be our starting point there. And then I will do the, in this case, compression adjustment. Next. So you're going to start with this fully closed. And that's our setting. So we've got this all done. I'm going to take this out of the vise, and and we'll give it one more wipe down, and then we'll go ahead and get this one and the other one back on the bike. Okay, so with the fork legs back in the trees and the height set so that it's even on both sides, we're gonna go ahead and tighten the pinch bolts and complete the assembly of the front end. So pretty easy and straightforward on a fork that has one bolt in each spot. You're just gonna tighten it to the proper torque spec and move on. In a situation where certain bikes like the baggers and perhaps, I don't know, an aftermarket triple tree where you have 2 bolts on each side, you obviously need to go back and forth until they're both tight, because obviously as you tighten one, the other one's gonna get loose. So you just gotta make sure you do that, and you don't just do them each once and forget about it. So I'll do the other side. Okay, so with those tight, we can go ahead and continue with the rest of the install here. Certain bikes, the order is going to be important in terms of the fender and the wheel. One won't go on without the other, you know, depends on what it is. What I like to do here on the Dynas, you have to do it on the baggers. Fender has to go on first. On the 39mm bikes, the fender can't go on first. On these, pretty sure it can be either way. But for whatever, I like to put the fender on first, but not fully tighten it. It's better to tighten your axle first and then tighten your fender so that the fork legs sit where they're supposed to sit, and they're not being tweaked and pulling on the fender if they've already been tightened there. So I'm gonna grab that fender, I'll put it on, and then we'll come back and keep going. Okay, so with the fender loosely in position, go ahead and get the wheel and axle back on. All right, so we'll get that in position there. And probably gonna have to raise up a little bit here. Well, that looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Get our spacers, no ABS on this bike, so we got 2 spacers and no speed sensor. Okay. Spacers in position. Got our axle that we cleaned, put a little bit of fresh anti-seize on. Slide that in. And go ahead and get the washer and nut started on the other side. Okay. So now what I like to do is raise the bike up, take the wheel off the ground so that everything is just sort of hanging loosely, and get an initial torque. Just get that snugged. Okay. All right, it's dragging on the vise a little bit, but can tell that it's fine. Now we want to do is, now that the fork is in a fixed position because of the axle, we'll tighten this up first. We'll go ahead and tighten the fender up. So let's clamp here. now our fork is in a fixed position, and we'll go ahead and tighten up the fender nice and evenly to get it to go on, hopefully nice and straight. All right, and then you're not gonna be able to see it, but we've got our caliper hanging here. It simply just needs to slide back over the rotor, back into position. And just get the bolts started. And we'll get that tightened down. All right, still have to torque our axle. All right, so generally speaking, you do want to do the torque on the axle before you do the clamp here. However, in our case, it was snug enough that it was sitting flush, so there's not going to be any difference there. But that is it for the reassembly. Just want to check and make sure your front brake is still working, which obviously it is. Everything's nice and tight. And basically what we need to do from here as far as the front suspension goes is just get a double check when the bike is on the ground and make sure everything is working as it should be and that the sag looks good. But otherwise, front suspension is good to go. So our next step here is we're going to come back to the pipe. So we're going to cut the video now and we'll jump back in when we've got our solution for the front forward controls figured out. Won't be any delay in terms of the video. We'll go right from here to there. It just might take us a couple days on our end to get that sorted out and see what the customer wants to do. So we'll be right back. All right, so after a brief detour to get the forward control situation squared away on this bike, we are back to where we were before, about ready to get the HPI pipe put on. So as it was already on, we've already done all the setup for it, our bracket is on, all that stuff. We just gotta go ahead and put the headers and then the muffler back on. Basically what I was talking about on the forward control, this is a factory Harley forward control. Obviously the foot peg is different. But the issue was, and this is what was on this bike before, obviously a Street Bob doesn't come with this, but the customer had converted it to forward controls, and then after having done that, had changed it to an aftermarket set of forwards that he thought he was gonna like better. Those, however, basically had the linkage for the brake pedal a little bit further back, and that was causing an interference with the header from the pipe. And that's probably something you'd run into on a lot of pipes, so I'd be a little concerned about, just make sure, if you're getting a new pipe, new controls, all that it's gonna work together. But in any event, fortunately, he still had these sitting in a box, so we just went ahead and just threw them back on. We did the other side too. So now we should have no problem getting our head pipes on with the clearance that we need. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab those, get a set of gloves back on, and we'll get this bike wrapped up. Okay, so basically we are roughly where we were when we left off the last time. We've got our head pipes loosely connected. You can see the assembly still loose here. We've got our spring clips on, put some anti-seize in here so we can get this back apart. And we've got our rear clamp started with all the hardware in the correct orientation. So what we're gonna do from here is just go ahead and evenly tighten the head studs and then we'll come back and tighten the clamp at the end. So the idea here is to keep this nice and straight and to keep it oriented the way you want it. So obviously we're trying to make sure we just keep it away from the frame, and that most importantly, the the headers are gonna sit flat on the heads. So we'll do that now. All right, so with our wiring done and our new Saddlemen step up on, that's gonna be a wrap on this Dyna Street Bob. So just a quick recap, obviously what we did here was we got a new air cleaner put on, got our Hpi pipe put on, we got Ohlins front cartridges, Ohlins rear shocks, our turn signal strut lights back here, and a Saddlemen seat. So pretty big swing, knocking a whole bunch of stuff out all at once on this bike, and it is definitely gonna be a whole new animal by the time he comes to pick it up and take it for a ride. I don't think this angle does it justice, so I think once I get it on the ground, we might try and get a little bit more, at least a photo of it for you, just so you can see what it looks like. But if nothing else, let's hear what it sounds like, right? Can't beat an HPI 2-in-1. That's all I have to say. We're going to end it right there. Thanks for watching.